Despite people's better judgment, the hype for Starfield is slowly building. It's a path we've witnessed many times before. The question is always, how will it all end? Well, there's no way to be sure right now, but the fact remains Starfield does appear to be an interesting game. For a lot of people, it ticks many of the right boxes: a huge open world game, spaceships, space themed, epic RPG, freeform gameplay. Now, there's a lot of unknowns about the game, however. The obvious ones, well, they're obvious. What's the story? How long is the game? How big is the map? And there's endless questions along those sort of lines. Personally though, I'm far more interested in the specifics that will give the game its personality. And of those, very little is known indeed. In fact, here's 5 big unknowns for Starfield. Starfield, of course, will have spaceships. The teaser trailer made this extremely clear, as have a few apparently leaked images over the time. What isn't as clear is what role the spaceships will have in the game. Will we, for example, be able to freely fly them as we would in a traditional space game such as Elite Dangerous or Freelancer? Or will they instead act as a form of fast travel like the horse and cart in Skyrim, or perhaps more to the point, like the spaceships in the Outer Worlds? Maybe they will all instead become a form of hybrid. Personally, I wouldn't at all be surprised to see ships act as some form of player base or player housing, and there were some rumours early on that may well be the case. Something that gets upgraded over time, or something that maybe even players can build themselves. In the end then, I wouldn't at all be surprised to see the functionality of the ships in Starfield behaving more like the Normandy from Mass Effect rather than a ship from Elite. Time will tell though, but for now, this is definitely one of the big unknowns. Now, even if players cannot directly fly spaceships in Starfield, it would still make sense to have some form of spaceship combat. That said, it's a complete mystery to consider how this would unfold. Whilst Bethesda are well known for their massive, sprawling game worlds, they certainly aren't the best company when it comes to combat. Spaceship combat then is challenging at the best of times, even for developers highly experienced in the field. The biggest unknown here then might not be so much whether Starfield has spaceship combat, but rather if Bethesda could actually make it good combat. Starfield, the very title invokes thoughts of space. The question here then is just how much of this game will actually be set in space itself. Will there be environments set in the deep void of space with various encounters therein? So far, the Starfield marketing has highlighted a variety of planetary locations. Maybe this suggests that Starfield will be more of a clone of the Outer Worlds, a game set purely on various planets, all interlinked by a spaceship that you have no real control over. But it's a curious thought either way, to say the least, definitely one of the big unknowns. It could be argued that planets, and more pointedly the size of planets, is a bit less of an unknown at the moment, and that's largely because of the marketing PR campaign going on that has shown a few of the different environments, at least in terms of discussing what they're about. And it seems that most of the planet areas that have been focused upon so far are limited to certain regions on specific planets, maybe a city, a village, or some type of outpost. It seems unlikely that players will be able to freely explore the entire world, at least that would be the impression I'm getting at the moment. However, at this point, that still remains somewhat of an unknown. That said, if I were to speculate, I'd bet on planets actually restricting people to zones of some type, rather than entire free-form roaming of the full planet. Even if space itself doesn't play an especially large part of the game as an environment, space stations could still be a possibility. These maybe could exist as small locations or even larger ones, or they could simply not exist at all, which would be a massive wasted opportunity in a space game, wouldn't it? But without knowing anything about the game itself, it kind of feels to me as though space stations would be perfectly fitted or perfectly positioned to be the equivalent of small villages, tombs and dungeons that can be found in Skyrim. Then again, as mentioned a moment ago, at this point anything really is possible. So for me, those are the 5 big unknowns for Starfield right now. For me, they're certainly more important than the size of the game, the size of the maps, what type of character class players can have, and what type of skills might be found within the game. All that because the points I've mentioned really would determine the personality of the game itself, the character, and the shape that it takes. Of course, these are unknowns, so that brings us right back to the opening point of the video about hype and being cautious. Yet, that hype machine is a tricky beast and often manages to hook its claws back in regardless of previous experience. So far, Bethesda is somehow managing to drive interest in Starfield up, whilst at the same time sharing very little about it. Currently the game is still a year away almost to the day, assuming it hits its release target. That's another unknown, and perhaps another unknown is whether or not the game will be any good. Hopefully though, the next few months will begin to reveal more information about the title. That then brings us to an end of this video. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.